The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of the old city district as Marcus Thompson adjusted his ceremonial uniform one final time. The red wool jacket with its golden braids felt heavier today, somehow different from all the other mornings he had worn it during his 5 years of service as a royal guard. His polished black boots clicked against the pavement as he made his way toward the palace gates. Unaware that this day would test every skill he had learned during his military training, Marcus had grown up in a small village outside the capital, where his father worked as a blacksmith and his mother tended to their modest garden. Life was simple then, filled with the rhythm of hammer strikes and the smell of fresh bread. But Marcus had always dreamed of something bigger, something that would make his parents proud. When he turned 18, he enlisted in the army, determined to prove himself worthy of protecting the crown. The training had been brutal. Months of physical conditioning, weapons training, and mental preparation had transformed the village boy into a disciplined soldier. His instructors praised his quick reflexes and calm demeanor under pressure. After 3 years of exemplary service, Marcus was selected for the elite Royal Guard unit, an honor that only the best soldiers could achieve. Now, as he walked through the familiar streets, Marcus noticed the usual morning bustle of merchants setting up their stalls and children hurrying to school. The bakery on Elm Street filled the air with the scent of fresh pastries, while Mrs. Rodriguez swept the front of her flower shop humming a cheerful tune. Everything seemed perfectly normal, just another peaceful day in the district he had sworn to protect. What Marcus did not know was that 3 blocks away, a group of dangerous men were putting the finishing touches on a plan they had been developing for weeks. The Shadow Serpents, as they called themselves, were not ordinary criminals. Led by a man known only as Viper, they had built a reputation for daring heists and violent confrontations with law enforcement. Their latest scheme was their most ambitious yet. Viper stood in the abandoned warehouse, studying the detailed map spread across a wooden crate. His weathered face bore the scars of countless fights, and his cold gray eyes showed no trace of mercy or doubt. Around him, 8 of his most trusted men cleaned their weapons and reviewed their assigned positions. Each member of the gang had been chosen for specific skills: Tommy the explosives expert, Snake the marksman, Razor the hand-to-hand combat specialist, and others whose nicknames reflected their deadly talents. The plan was simple in concept, but complex in execution. They had learned through their network of informants that Marcus Thompson followed the same route to work every morning, passing through the narrow alley behind the old textile factory. This alley provided the perfect ambush point. High walls, on both sides limited escape routes and minimal foot traffic during the early morning hours. Their goal was not robbery or random violence. Viper had a personal vendetta against the Royal Guard unit. 2 years earlier, his younger brother had been killed during a botched bank robbery when Royal Guards responded to the scene. The official report stated that his brother had been armed and posed an immediate threat. But Viper believed the guards had used excessive force. Since that day, he had been planning his revenge. As Marcus continued his walk, he passed the newspaper stand where old Mr. Peterson was arranging the morning editions. The headlines spoke of political meetings and economic developments, typical news for a Tuesday morning. Marcus purchased his usual paper and tucked it under his arm, planning to read it during his break later in the day. The Royal Guard's daily routine was well established and known throughout the community. Local residents had grown accustomed to seeing the uniformed guards walking their regular patrols, and many felt safer knowing these trained professionals were watching over their neighborhood. Marcus took pride in being part of this sense of security, often stopping to chat with shop owners or help elderly residents carry their groceries. Meanwhile, in the warehouse, Viper was giving his final instructions to the gang members. Each man knew his role perfectly. 4 would position themselves at the entrance to the alley, blocking any retreat. 2 would take elevated positions on the fire escapes of adjacent buildings, providing cover and surveillance. The remaining 2, including Viper himself, would confront Marcus directly in the narrow passage. The gang had studied Marcus's habits extensively. They knew he was highly trained and potentially dangerous, but they believed their superior numbers and element of surprise would overwhelm him quickly. Viper had specifically chosen this location because he wanted the confrontation to be decisive and brutal, sending a clear message to other royal guards about the consequences of crossing the shadow serpents. As the clock tower chimed 8 times, both Marcus and the gang members began moving toward their fateful encounter. Marcus folded his newspaper and picked up his pace slightly, not wanting to be late for the morning briefing. The shadow serpents left the warehouse in pairs, taking different routes to avoid attracting attention as they made their way to the ambush site. The morning air was crisp and clean, with a gentle breeze carrying the sounds of the awakening city. Birds chirped in the few trees that lined the residential streets, and the distant sound of traffic created a steady background hum. It was the kind of morning that promised a beautiful day ahead, the kind of morning when people made plans for picnics or outdoor activities. But in the shadows of the narrow alley behind the textile factory, 8 dangerous men were taking their positions, checking their weapons one final time and waiting for their target to appear. The trap was set, and in just a few minutes the peaceful morning would erupt into violence that would change everything for everyone involved. Marcus Thompson, unaware of the danger ahead, continued walking toward what he believed would be just another ordinary day of service, carrying with him 5 years of training and an unwavering commitment to protect and serve his community. Marcus approached the entrance to the familiar alley, the same shortcut he had taken every morning for the past 2 years. The narrow passage between the old textile factory and the apartment building had always been quiet at this hour, providing a peaceful moment of solitude before the busy day ahead. Today, however, something felt different. A subtle change in the atmosphere made him pause for just a moment at the alley's mouth. His military training had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, those instincts were sending him warning signals. The usual morning sound seemed muffled, and there was an unnatural stillness in the air. Marcus scanned the alley carefully, his eyes moving from one end to the other, checking the fire escapes and doorways for anything unusual. Nothing appeared, obviously wrong, yet the feeling of unease persisted. High above, Snake and Razor crouched on the metal fire escape platforms, their hearts pounding as they watched the Royal Guard hesitate at the alley entrance. They had been in position for 20 minutes and their muscles were beginning to cramp from staying perfectly still. Both men were experienced in ambush tactics, but something about this particular target made them more nervous than usual. They had heard stories about Royal Guard training and combat effectiveness. At the far end of the alley, Tommy and Fish waited behind a large dumpster, their hands resting on concealed weapons. The original plan called for them to block the exit once. Marcus was halfway through the passage, but now they were wondering if their target might actually turn around and choose a different route. Viper had been very specific about what would happen to anyone who let the Royal Guard escape. Marcus decided to proceed, but with heightened alertness. He stepped into the alley, his posture subtly shifting from relaxed to ready. His right hand moved closer to his service weapon, though he kept the movement casual and natural. Years of training had taught him how to prepare for action without telegraphing his intentions to potential threats. Every step was measured and deliberate. Viper emerged from his hiding spot behind a maintenance shed, his face twisted into a cold smile of satisfaction. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the beginning of his revenge against the Royal Guard unit. In his mind, he could see his brother's face, remembering the promise he had made at the funeral to make them pay for what had happened. Today that promise would be fulfilled. The gang leader stepped into the center of the alley, blocking Marcus's path forward. His voice was rough and threatening as he spoke for the first time. Well, look what we have here. One of the precious Royal Guards all dressed up in his fancy uniform. Viper's hand rested on the grip of a large knife tucked into his belt, and his eyes burned with hatred and anticipation. Marcus stopped walking but maintained his composure, quickly assessing the situation. One man directly ahead, but his peripheral vision caught movement on the fire escapes above and shadows shifting near the alley's exit. This was clearly a planned ambush, not a random encounter. His training kicked in automatically, and his mind began calculating distances, cover options, and escape routes. "I don't know what you want," Marcus said calmly, keeping his voice steady and non-threatening, "but I'm sure we can resolve this peacefully. Nobody needs to get hurt here today." He was buying time, trying to determine exactly how many attackers he was facing and what their intentions might be. The situation was clearly dangerous but not yet hopeless. Viper laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the brick walls surrounding them. Peacefully? That's rich coming from one of you murderers. You people don't know the meaning of the word peaceful. You shoot first and ask questions later, isn't that right? The gang leader's voice grew louder and more agitated as he spoke, his anger building toward the explosion he had been planning for months. From their positions, the other gang members watched the confrontation develop exactly as they had rehearsed. Snake adjusted his grip on his weapon, waiting for Viper's signal to begin the attack. Razor shifted his weight, preparing to drop down from the fire escape once the action started. At the exit, Tommy and Fish moved into position to block any retreat, just as they had practiced dozens of times in the warehouse. Marcus realized that talking was not going to resolve this situation. The man in front of him was clearly driven by some personal grievance, and the elaborate setup suggested this was specifically targeting him, not a random crime of opportunity. He would need to fight his way out, and the odds were heavily stacked against him. 8 against 1 was not impossible, but it would require perfect execution and a bit of luck. The Royal Guard's training included extensive close-quarters combat techniques, both armed and unarmed. His instructors had emphasized the importance of staying calm under pressure, using the environment to his advantage, and never giving up no matter how desperate the situation might appear. All of those lessons were about to be put to the ultimate test. Your brother made his choice that day, Marcus said quietly, having recognized the signs of personal revenge in Viper's behavior. He was armed and threatening innocent people. We did what we had to do to protect them. It was a calculated risk, confirming what he suspected about the motive behind this ambush, but also potentially escalating the confrontation to violence. Viper's face contorted with rage at the mention of his brother. He was just a kid. He was scared and confused, and you animals gunned him down like a dog in the street. The gang leader pulled his knife from his belt, the blade gleaming in the morning sunlight that filtered down between the tall buildings. Today you're going to learn what it feels like to be helpless and afraid. The other gang members tensed as their leader drew his weapon, knowing that the talking phase was over and the violence was about to begin. Each man checked his position one final time, making sure he was ready to play his part in what they expected would be a quick and brutal encounter. They had done this kind of thing before, though never against a target with Royal Guard training. Marcus noted the knife, but also remained aware of the other threats surrounding him. The narrow alley limited his mobility, but it also meant that not all of his attackers could engage him simultaneously. If he could control the flow of the fight and deal with them one or two at a time, he might have a chance. It would require speed, precision, and ruthless efficiency. The tension in the alley reached its breaking point as Viper raised his knife and let out a savage war cry. This was the signal the other gang members had been waiting for, and suddenly the narrow passage erupted into chaos. Snake and Razor dropped from their elevated positions on the fire escapes, landing heavily on the pavement behind Marcus, while Tommy and Fish rushed forward from the exit, completing the trap they had so carefully prepared. Marcus moved with lightning speed, his years of training taking over as his conscious mind stepped aside. He rolled to his right toward the brick wall of the textile factory, avoiding Viper's initial knife thrust by mere inches. The blade scraped against the wall where his chest had been just a split second earlier, sending sparks flying and leaving a deep gouge in the old brick. As he came out of the roll, Marcus's hand found a loose piece of metal pipe that had been left behind by construction workers months earlier. Without hesitation, he swung it upward in a vicious arc, catching Snake in the jaw just as the gang member was pulling a pistol from his jacket. The impact was devastating, shattering teeth and sending the weapon spinning away across the alley floor. Snake collapsed backward, blood streaming from his mouth, his jaw clearly broken and his eyes rolling back in his head. The sight of their teammate going down so quickly and brutally shocked the other gang members, who had expected this to be a simple matter of overwhelming a single opponent through superior numbers. They were beginning to realize they had seriously underestimated their target. Razor, who had landed closer to the alley entrance, charged forward with a baseball bat raised above his head. His nickname came from his preference for razor blades, but today he had chosen a more conventional weapon, For what he expected would be a beating rather than a cutting, the wooden bat whistled through the air as he brought it down toward Marcus's skull with enough force to crush bone. The royal guard ducked under the swing and drove his shoulder into Razor's midsection, lifting the smaller man off his feet and slamming him back first into the brick wall. The impact drove all the air from Razor's lungs and left him gasping and stunned. Marcus followed up with a devastating elbow strike to the side of Razor's head, and the gang member slumped to the ground unconscious, 2 down, 6 to go. But Marcus knew he could not afford to feel any satisfaction yet. The remaining attackers were spreading out, trying to surround him and use their numerical advantage more effectively. Viper was circling to his left, still wielding the knife, with deadly intent, while Tommy and Fish were approaching from the exit end of the alley with their own weapons drawn. From the fire escapes above, 2 more gang members were taking aim with pistols, trying to get a clear shot that would not risk hitting their own people. The confined space and fast-moving combat made this extremely difficult, but Marcus knew that eventually one of them would find an opportunity. He needed to keep moving and use the other gang members as human shields. Viper lunged forward again, this time aiming for Marcus's throat with a quick stabbing motion. The royal guard grabbed a garbage can lid from nearby and used it as a shield, deflecting the knife while simultaneously kicking Viper in the knee. The gang leader howled in pain and stumbled, but managed to keep his footing and maintain his grip on the weapon. Tommy rushed in from behind, swinging a heavy chain that he had wrapped around his right fist. The metal links cut through the air with a sound like rushing wind, and Marcus had to throw himself sideways to avoid being struck. The chain smashed into the brick wall, sending chips of mortar flying and leaving a visible dent in the ancient masonry. As Marcus rolled away from Tommy's attack, he came up near the unconscious form of Razor. Without breaking his momentum, he grabbed the fallen baseball bat and spun around to face his attackers. The wooden weapon felt good in his hands, familiar and well-balanced. His father had taught him to swing a hammer in the blacksmith shop, and the motions were remarkably similar. Fish had drawn a pistol and was trying to line up a shot, but the fast-moving combat and the presence of his own teammates in the line of fire made it nearly impossible. Every time he thought he had a clear target, Marcus would move behind another gang member or duck behind cover. Frustration was building among the attackers as their carefully planned ambush turned into a chaotic brawl. From above, one of the gang members on the fire escape finally saw his chance and fired a shot. The bullet ricocheted off the pavement, near Marcus's feet, sending up a small shower of concrete chips. The sound of the gunshot echoed between the tall buildings, and Marcus realized that the noise might bring help if there were any police officers in the area. But he could not count on rescue arriving in time. He needed to end this fight quickly, before the gang members could regroup and coordinate their attacks more effectively. The narrow alley was actually working in his favor now, preventing them from using their numbers efficiently. But that advantage would not last forever. Viper was limping but still dangerous, his eyes blazing with hatred and determination. The gang leader had not come this far just to give up because of an injured knee. His brother's death still burned in his memory, and he would not rest until he had his revenge. The knife in his hand was slick with his own sweat, but his grip remained firm and deadly. Marcus feinted toward Tommy, then suddenly reversed direction and brought the baseball bat around in a horizontal swing, aimed at Viper's weapon hand. The gang leader tried to pull back, but he was not quick enough. The bat connected with his wrist with a sickening crack, and the knife went flying across the alley to clatter against the far wall. Viper screamed in pain and rage, clutching his broken wrist against his chest. The injury was severe enough to take him out of the immediate fight, but Marcus knew that the gang leader's men would be even more determined now that their boss was hurt. The sound of sirens in the distance suggested that someone had indeed heard the gunshot and called for help, but the police were still several minutes away. The sound of approaching sirens seemed to energize the remaining gang members rather than discourage them. Fish shouted orders to the others, taking command now that Viper was temporarily disabled. "Finish him quick. We need to get out of here before the cops arrive." His voice carried the desperation of a man who knew that capture would mean years in prison, especially after assaulting a royal guard. 2 more gang members rappelled down from the fire escapes, having abandoned their elevated shooting positions in favor of joining the ground assault. Crusher and Blade hit the alley floor running, their weapons already drawn and their faces set in grim determination. They had reputations to maintain and money to earn, and neither was willing to let a single royal guard destroy their carefully planned operation. Marcus found himself facing 5 active opponents in the narrow space, with Viper wounded, but still, potentially dangerous if he could retrieve a weapon. The unconscious forms of Snake and Razor lay crumpled against the walls, serving as grim reminders of what was at stake. The Royal Guard's uniform was torn and dirty now, but his resolve remained unshaken. Crusher lived up to his nickname by wielding a heavy wrench that could easily shatter bones with a solid hit. He advanced from Marcus's left side, swinging the tool in wide arcs that forced the Royal Guard to keep backing away. Meanwhile, Blade produced a switchblade knife that clicked open with a menacing sound, the sharp steel gleaming despite the shadows cast by the surrounding buildings. Tommy had rewrapped his chain around both hands, turning it into a flexible weapon that could strike from unexpected angles. Fish kept his pistol ready, still looking for a clear shot that would not endanger his teammates. The coordination between the gang members was improving as they settled into the rhythm of combat and learned to work around each other's movements. Marcus realized he needed to change his strategy. Defensive fighting might keep him alive for a few more minutes, but it would not win the battle. He needed to go on the offensive and eliminate these threats one by one before reinforcements arrived, or before one of them got lucky with a weapon strike. The baseball bat felt solid in his hands, but he would need more than just a good weapon to survive this encounter. The Royal Guard suddenly charged straight at Crusher, using his superior reach to land a devastating blow with the bat before the gang member could bring his wrench into play. The wooden weapon connected with Crusher's shoulder, and the sound of breaking bone echoed through the alley. The big man dropped his wrench and fell to his knees, screaming in agony as his arm hung uselessly at his side. But Marcus's aggressive move had left him exposed to attack from the other direction. Blade took advantage of the opportunity and rushed, in with his knife extended, aiming for the Royal Guard's ribs. Only a last-second twist saved Marcus from a potentially fatal wound, but the blade still sliced through his uniform jacket and left a shallow cut across his side. The pain from the knife wound sent a surge of adrenaline through Marcus's system, sharpening his focus and increasing his speed. He spun around and drove his elbow into Blade's face, crushing the gang member's nose and sending blood streaming down his shirt. Blade staggered backward, temporarily blinded by tears and blood, giving Marcus a moment to reassess the situation. Fish finally saw his chance and fired another shot, this one coming much closer to its target. The bullet grazed Marcus's left arm, tearing through the sleeve of his jacket and leaving a burning sensation along his bicep. The wound was not serious, but it served as a reminder that time was running out. Eventually, one of these shots would find its mark. Tommy tried to take advantage of Marcus's momentary distraction and swung his chain in a wide overhead arc. The Royal Guard saw the attack coming and caught the chain with his free hand, ignoring the pain as the metal links bit into his palm. With a powerful yank, he pulled Tommy off balance and then brought the bat around in a crushing blow to the gang member's temple. Tommy collapsed immediately, his eyes rolling back as he lost consciousness. The chain fell from his nerveless fingers to coil on the ground like a metal snake. 4 gang members were now out of action, but Fish still had his gun and was becoming increasingly desperate as the sirens grew louder in the distance. Viper had managed to crawl over to where his knife had fallen and was trying to pick it up with his uninjured hand. The gang leader's face was pale with pain and shock, but his hatred still burned bright in his eyes. He would not give up his quest for revenge, no matter how badly the ambush had gone wrong. Blade had wiped enough blood from his eyes to see again, and was circling around behind Marcus, his switchblade still clutched in his hand. The gang member's broken nose had swollen grotesquely, making his breathing labored and painful, but he was still dangerous and determined to make the Royal Guard pay for the injury. Marcus knew he was running out of time and energy. The multiple fights and minor wounds were beginning to take their toll, and he could feel his movement slowing slightly. The approaching police sirens meant that help was coming, but they also meant that the remaining gang members would become increasingly reckless and unpredictable as their escape window narrowed. Fish raised his pistol for what he hoped would be the final shot, taking careful aim at Marcus's center mass. The gang members' hands were steady despite the stress of the situation, and at this close range it would be very difficult to miss. His finger began to squeeze the trigger, and Marcus realized that he had perhaps 2 seconds before the bullet would end his life. The Royal Guard made a desperate dive toward the brick wall of the textile factory, hoping to use the uneven surface for cover. As he moved, he heard the sharp crack of the pistol firing and felt the bullet whistle past his ear. The shot had missed by inches, and Fish was already working the action to fire again. Viper had finally managed to grip his knife with his good hand and was struggling to his feet, his broken wrist cradled against his body. The gang leader's face was twisted with pain and fury, and Marcus could see that the man was beyond rational thought now. This had become personal in a way that went far beyond the original plan for simple revenge. The police sirens were now unmistakably close, their wailing echoes bouncing off the surrounding buildings and filling the alley with urgent sound. Fish's desperation reached a fever pitch as he realized that his window for escape was rapidly closing. The gang member fired 2 more quick shots, both missing Marcus by mere inches as the Royal Guard used every piece of cover available in the narrow space. Marcus rolled behind the large dumpster at the alley's end, the same hiding spot that Tommy and Fish had used earlier in their ambush. Bullets sparked off the metal surface, creating bright flashes and sharp ringing sounds that added to the chaos of the confined battle. He could hear Fish cursing and shouting, the gang member's voice cracking with stress and fear of capture. From his position behind the dumpster, Marcus could see that Blade was trying to flank him from the left while Viper approached from the right, despite his injured wrist. The gang leader had managed to transfer his knife to his good hand, though his grip appeared unsteady and weak. Both men were moving carefully, trying to coordinate their final assault on the Royal Guard who had ruined their carefully planned revenge. The sound of squealing brakes and car doors slamming echoed from the street beyond the alley as the first police units arrived on the scene. Shouts and radio chatter filtered through the air, and Marcus knew that backup was finally here. But the remaining gang members were now trapped and more dangerous than ever, fighting with the desperation of cornered animals who had nothing left to lose. Fish made a crucial mistake by trying to reload his weapon while still in the open. Marcus saw the opportunity and burst from behind the dumpster with explosive speed, covering the distance between them in 3 powerful strides. The baseball bat connected with Fish's gun hand, just as the gang member was trying to slam a fresh magazine into place, sending both weapon and ammunition flying across the alley floor. The impact shattered Fish's wrist and several fingers, leaving the gang member writhing in agony and effectively removing him from the fight. Marcus did not pause to admire his work, immediately spinning around to face the remaining 2 threats who were converging on his position from opposite sides. Blade reached him first, slashing wildly with his switchblade in a series of desperate attacks that had more fury than skill behind them. The gang member's broken nose was affecting his balance and depth perception, making his strikes clumsy and predictable. Marcus parried the first 2 cuts with the bat, then brought the weapon around in a devastating uppercut that caught Blade under the chin. The gang member's head snapped back with tremendous force and he was unconscious before his body hit the ground. His switchblade skittered away across the pavement, coming to rest near the unconscious form of Razor. 6 gang members were now down, leaving only Viper standing between Marcus and victory. The gang leader stumbled forward, his knife held high, but his movements unsteady and weak. The combination of his broken wrist, blood loss, and emotional trauma had taken a severe toll on his fighting ability. Yet his eyes still burned with the same hatred that had driven him to plan this elaborate revenge, and Marcus knew that wounded predators were often the most dangerous. "This is for my brother," Viper screamed, putting all his remaining strength into one final lunge with the knife. His attack was wild and uncontrolled, driven more by emotion than technique, but the blade was still sharp enough to kill if it found its target. Marcus sidestepped the clumsy attack and brought the baseball bat down on Viper's knife arm with precise control. The gang leader's elbow joint hyperextended with a sickening pop, and his weapon fell from nerveless fingers for the second time. Viper collapsed to his knees, cradling both injured arms against his body and moaning in defeat. The alley fell silent, except for the groans of wounded gang members and the approaching footsteps of police officers entering from both ends of the narrow passage. Marcus stood in the center of the carnage, his uniform torn and bloodstained but his posture still straight and proud. The baseball bat dropped from his tired hands as the adrenaline began to fade and exhaustion set in. "Police, drop your weapons." The commanding voice echoed from the alley entrance as armed officers took positions with their weapons drawn. They could see the aftermath of the violent confrontation, but needed to secure the scene before determining exactly what had happened. Royal Guard Marcus Thompson, badge number 2847. Marcus called out clearly, raising his hands to show he was not armed. 8 suspects down. Situation contained. His voice was steady despite his fatigue, maintaining the professional demeanor that had been drilled into him during years of training. The lead police officer, Sergeant Williams, recognized Marcus from previous joint operations and quickly assessed the situation. The evidence was clear. 1 Royal Guard surrounded by 8 defeated criminals in what was obviously the aftermath of an attempted ambush. Williams holstered his weapon and approached Marcus with concern evident on his weathered face. "Jesus, Marcus, what happened here?" Williams asked as he surveyed the unconscious and wounded gang members scattered throughout the alley. "Looks like you walked into a war zone." The sergeant was already calling for medical assistance over his radio, knowing that several of the suspects would need immediate treatment. Marcus quickly explained the ambush and the gang's apparent connection to a previous incident involving Viper's brother. As he spoke, paramedics arrived and began assessing the wounded while additional police officers secured the scene and began collecting evidence. The narrow alley was soon crowded with law enforcement personnel and emergency responders. Viper was conscious but subdued as paramedics worked on his multiple injuries. His earlier rage had given way to the numb realization that his quest for revenge had not only failed, but had also destroyed his criminal organization. All of his most trusted men were either unconscious or seriously wounded, and the police would soon be investigating every aspect of their operations. As Marcus was being checked over by a paramedic, he reflected on how quickly a routine morning walk had turned into a life-or-death struggle. His training had saved his life, but he also knew that luck had played a role in his survival. 8 against 1 were odds that even the best trained soldier might not overcome, and several moments during the fight could have ended very differently. 3 weeks after the alley confrontation, Marcus sat in the comfortable office of Captain Harrison, commander of the Royal Guard unit. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, casting long rectangles of golden light across the polished wooden floor. His injuries had healed well, leaving only faint scars as reminders of that violent encounter, but the psychological impact would take longer to fade completely. The investigation into the Shadow Serpents had revealed the true scope of their criminal organization. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen had spent days analyzing evidence found in their warehouse hideout, uncovering connections to bank robberies, weapon trafficking, and intimidation schemes that stretched back over 2 years. Viper's personal vendetta against the Royal Guard had been just one motivation among many criminal enterprises. The prosecution is confident they can secure conviction on multiple charges for all 8 suspects, Captain Harrison informed Marcus as he reviewed the thick case file spread across his desk. Attempted murder of a law enforcement officer, conspiracy, weapons charges, and a dozen other felonies. Most of them are looking at 20 years or more in prison. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, still processing the magnitude of what had occurred. 8 professional criminals had planned his assassination with military precision, studying his routines and preparing for weeks to ensure their success. The fact that their plan had failed so completely was partly due to his training, but he remained humble about the role that chance had played in his survival. Viper had been the most seriously injured of the gang members, requiring surgery to repair his shattered wrist and dislocated elbow. The gang leader now faced the rest of his life in prison, his quest for revenge having cost him everything he had built over years of criminal activity. His remaining family members had publicly distanced themselves from his actions, expressing relief that no innocent people had been hurt during the confrontation. The media attention had been intense, but generally positive, with newspapers and television reports praising Marcus's courage and skill in defeating such overwhelming odds. He had declined most interview requests, preferring to let the official police reports speak for themselves rather than seeking personal glory from the incident. However, the story had resonated with the public in ways that surprised everyone, involved. Sales of Royal Guard recruitment materials increased dramatically as young people were inspired by Marcus's example of dedication and bravery under extreme pressure. The palace received hundreds of letters thanking the Royal Guard unit for their service and protection of the community. Marcus had returned to his regular duties after a brief medical leave, walking the same routes and maintaining the same professional demeanor that had characterized his service for 5 years. The familiar weight of his ceremonial uniform felt comforting now, a symbol of the trust that the community placed in him and his fellow guards. But he had made one significant change to his daily routine. No longer did he take the same path to work every morning. Instead, Marcus varied his routes randomly, sometimes walking through the busy commercial district, other times taking the longer path through the residential neighborhoods. This simple precaution would make it much more difficult for anyone to plan another ambush. The alley behind the textile factory had been thoroughly cleaned and repaired, with new lighting installed to improve visibility during early morning hours. The city council had also approved funding for additional police patrols in the area, ensuring that such an incident would be much less likely to occur in the future. Mrs. Rodriguez, the flower shop owner, had visited Marcus personally to thank him for his service and to express her relief that he had survived the attack. Many other local residents had done the same, bringing gifts of food and expressing their gratitude for the sense of security that the Royal Guard provided to their community. The warehouse where the Shadow Serpents had planned their attack was now empty and scheduled for demolition. Police had removed all evidence and seized assets worth hundreds of thousands of dollars that had been acquired through illegal activities. The building would eventually be replaced by affordable housing for working families, a fitting transformation from a place of criminal planning to one of honest living. Snake had required extensive dental work to repair the damage from Marcus's initial counterattack, while Razor suffered a concussion that took weeks to heal completely. Tommy's broken ribs had punctured a lung, requiring emergency surgery and a lengthy hospital stay. All of the gang members had learned that attacking a trained Royal Guard carried consequences far beyond what they had anticipated. Detective Inspector Chen had also uncovered evidence linking the Shadow Serpents to the death of Viper's brother 2 years earlier. The original police report had been accurate. The young man had been armed and threatening hostages during a bank robbery. The Royal Guards who responded had followed proper procedures and used appropriate force to protect innocent lives. Viper's quest for revenge had been based on grief and denial, rather than any actual wrongdoing. Marcus often thought about that revelation during his quiet moments. The entire violent confrontation could have been avoided if Viper had been able to accept the truth about his brother's choices and death. Instead, misplaced anger and the desire for vengeance had destroyed 8 lives and traumatized an entire community. The Royal Guard training program had incorporated lessons learned from Marcus's experience into their curriculum. New recruits now spent additional time studying situational awareness and multiple attacker scenarios. The alley fight had become a case study in how proper training and mental preparation could overcome seemingly impossible odds. Captain Harrison closed the case file and looked directly at Marcus with evident pride. The palace has approved a commendation for exceptional bravery in the line of duty. There will be a ceremony next month where you'll receive the Guardian's Cross, the highest honor our unit can bestow. The captain's voice carried deep respect for the young man who had upheld the finest traditions of their service. Marcus felt honored but also somewhat uncomfortable with the attention. He had simply done his job, using the skills and training that taxpayers had invested in him to develop. The real heroes, in his opinion, were the police officers who responded to the scene and the paramedics who had saved the lives of several gang members despite their criminal actions. As he left the captain's office and stepped back into the bright morning sunlight, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed since that violent encounter in the alley. He had gained a deeper appreciation for the trust placed in him by the community and a renewed commitment to excellence in everything he did. The newspaper stand where old Mr. Peterson sold his papers was bustling with customers discussing the morning headlines. Marcus purchased his usual paper, noting with satisfaction that the front page story was about a new community center opening rather than crime or violence. These were the kinds of stories that made his dangerous work worthwhile. Walking through The peaceful streets toward the palace, Marcus Thompson carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced his greatest test and emerged victorious. The shadow serpents were behind bars, the community was safe, and justice had been served. Sometimes that was the best outcome anyone could hope for in an imperfect world.